Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Jeremy Beaman. Jeremy, they say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Biden has been grappling with the solar crisis for some time, and there was some action this week. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened?
Sure. So he did two things sort of affecting the solar energy. The first is he invoked the Defense Production Act to basically help fund and build more solar cells, solar modules, polysilicon, to produce more of that stuff here in the United States, because most of it's produced elsewhere and brought here and put into panels. The second thing he did was basically he uses his emergency trade powers to declare an emergency to basically preemptively exempt a particular category of tariffs from being imposed on these solar cell and module imports from four Southeast Asian countries. Those are the two things that have sort of dominated energy headlines this week, more so than oil and gas.
So there are some people who are made happy by this decision, and as is often the case in Washington, there are some people who are pretty angry. Who are the winners and losers?
That's right. Well, the broad solar industry is sort of maybe not perfectly divided, but there's a split here between domestic solar manufacturers, so U.S.-based companies that build solar cells and modules here in the United States, and then like other solar energy industry companies, developers, installers, racking companies that sort of put the panels together, use the manufacturing components to put the panels together and to build, residential or utility scale solar projects. So the manufacturing crowd wants tariffs to be imposed on imports from these four Southeast Asian countries. The rest of the industry vehemently opposes the tariffs and has really strongly been lobbying the Biden administration basically not to allow them to be imposed. And by way of background, the Commerce Department has been actively investigating whether to impose new tariffs on imports from these countries. And there's sort of been, again, upheaval really in the industry with so many companies and industry groups who oppose the tariffs, and lobbying the administration, sending them letters saying this is basically upending the industry. And they did have a tough first quarter, the worst, I believe, since 2020 in terms of the rate of growth that solar project deployment had. And so it really was the Biden administration taking a position and favoring sort of what the lobbyists who had been challenging the tariffs or the prospect of tariffs really, Biden administration really favored them in this situation. Now they tried to kind of serve both interests, the domestic manufacturers and the others, by invoking the DPA. But the sort of fine print of the DPA is for one, it's not an alternative to like actual policy from Congress, and there's not a lot of money behind it. Sources have told me, and so the administration really kind of been seen as intervening in this Commerce Department investigation by the manufacturers, who've been very upset about this, and some have alleged that it's actually illegal what the administration's done.
So the international and domestic interconnectedness has kind of complicated this, but what was sort of at issue in the Commerce Department investigation?
So again, it is complicated, but basically a California-based solar module manufacturer filed a petition with the Commerce Department and said, hey, we believe that companies, Chinese domiciled companies that operate in Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam are basically circumventing tariffs that the United States has on China, on Chinese solar products. And they're doing that by opening factories in these four countries, sending the products that sort of start out in China through these factories and then on their way to the United States in order to circumvent the tariffs. Now, the part of the industry that opposes the tariffs and that didn't want this investigation to be undertaken, they've sort of argued that the manufacturing process that happens in these Asian countries is quite significant, and therefore they wouldn't be technically subject to actual new tariffs. But of course, manufacturers think that they should be, and that they're basically just dumping product in these countries, the Chinese, in order to send to the United States. And domestic solar manufacturing, holds no water to to what the Chinese are. The Chinese demand just command the global market for the solar market. They got way ahead of the entire world on this, and the Chinese government also subsidizes many of these companies. So there's not really a level playing field. The manufacturers argue, and so they want the new tariffs so that they can stand up more factories and expand here and better compete with the Chinese. But for the solar industry, the broader solar industry who oppose the tariffs, they've argued that imposing tariffs will sort of interrupt business, and it already has, really. It will interrupt business and disrupt President Biden's climate ambitions, climate goals for deploying solar energy. And so those are sort of the things at play here.
What of these decisions, you mentioned the Biden administration's climate goals, what have these decisions done in terms of advancing or not advancing the Biden green agenda, which has had a number of challenges and setbacks between the composition of Congress, high energy prices that they have to address, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Where do you see any of that sort of affecting the broader policy agenda?
Well, this was sort of, so you have the explanation that President Biden gave on paper as to why he declared an emergency. His explanation wasn't an illegitimate one. There have been warnings that the United States faces a higher threat of blackouts this summer because the electricity grid is sort of short of reserve capacity. And so his explanation in declaring the emergency was we need to continue the pace of solar project deployment, development, in order to sort of hedge that from happening. And it may, to some degree, achieve that end. But certainly, I think it's impossible to understand what the administration's done outside of the scope of the Commerce Department's investigation. Because new tariffs and even just the threat of new tariffs have sent all these manufacturers in these Asian countries to, in some cases, cancel supply agreements with U.S. solar project developers, or just hike their prices because they may have to pay higher tariffs, even retroactively from the date the investigation was opened, if the Commerce Department does indeed find what's called a positive finding that tariffs are needed. And so this is a way for the administration to in some ways solve a couple problems maybe at once, advancing Biden's electricity, green energy agenda, and also to support these companies who don't want these tariffs to go forward. Again, the U.S. manufacturers, solar manufacturers, feel stranded on this because the remedy that they have here is to have the Commerce Department look into it and say, these companies in China, or these Chinese-based companies, are acting illegally, unfairly, or they're not. And so Biden has sort of preempted the Commerce Department in doing that.
The sun never sets on the Biden administration. Thank you, Jeremy. You can read Jeremy and subscribe to our Daily on Energy newsletter at washingtonexaminer.com.